all set.
Okay, thank you. Again, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. You know, we're approaching the crazy time when there are so many demands on our time. It's like you're running up against this schedule. You sometimes forget what D-Day is, or I should say C-Day for this matter. But so I'm very much grateful for people who took the time to join us. At the request of Councilmember Lupien, she expressed some significant concerns that I'd like for her to share and help guide us in moving toward a resolution. Councilmember Lupien?
Yes, thank you. I really appreciate everybody gathering. From what I had, I'm on the PIC advisory team. And so, you know, we've been given several presentations over the course of the pilot, and some of the statistics on how many calls PIC was going to alone were concerning to me. At the time, it was 6% of calls that PIC was going to alone, calls that were of a mental health nature. And before the pilot, it was 43%. And so there were concerns about how the calls were getting dispatched, and, you know, potentially the deciding factor on whether or not PIC goes alone is if it's considered violent in nature. And just knowing that the way that that question is asked sometimes can guide people into was feeling like potentially the way it had always been done was having police to respond, and that maybe there was some fear or hesitance to changing. I also went on a ride along a few weeks ago, and all 4 of the calls that we attended to could have been PIC only and weren't. And so I was just wanting to raise the alarm and see what we couldn't do together to have the PIC team do the job that we kind of asked them to do. So, you know, I'm not sure who's, if Commissioner Lamentorius, if you're planning on giving a presentation or how the meeting will begin, but I'm grateful to everyone who is here.
Yes, Councilmember Lupien, I do have the data that you requested, and I am able to share that data with you now, as well as then turn it over to my colleague, Director Mike Soretto, who will talk further beyond the data that I have to present. And then, of course, we'll entertain and field your questions. So if that's okay, I can begin with that information, which I have some visuals given the, you know, complexity of some of the information, wanting to make sure that I have the ability to explain what people will be seeing, council members as well as the general public who are viewing this. So just to give some critical information about the person in crisis team, just a recap for everyone, we did start off with 24/7 coverage, and we do have, we operate in teams of 2, our teams of emergency response social workers. We currently have 40 team positions in order to not only have the capacity for the mental health calls, but also to be able to grow into additional call types that the team can do alone. Just some dates that are really important to what Councilmember Lupien was alluding to from the PIC Advisory Committee. We began PIC alone on January 21st at the launch, and we began that with responding to 2 different call types that were designated and selected to be able to just have PIC go alone. So that is how we began the pilot. We began on 3/14. On March 14th, we made a transition with the introduction of the new computer-aided dispatch system, which Director Soretto will be able to talk about in more detail. But we began a couple of different things on that date. One is we began co-response with RPD to all mental health calls. Even, you know, so all mental health calls from dispatch, we began co-response. The PIC PIC requested response also began on that date, where RPD could go to a call that may not originate as a mental health call and then request the PIC team should the nature of that call change or be assessed to be different by the officers on the scene. So that also began on March 14th. On April 1st, we were able to add the third code that we had planned in our pilot to be able to have PIC go alone to. And there was a third code type that we had selected, and we were able to implement that on April 1st. As Councilmember Lupien alluded to, we looked at our data monthly, and as we reported to our advisory committee following our review of the data on May 31st, we identified that there were some barriers to getting the calls to PIC alone. Some of the barriers we were able to address at that time, in which we removed some call filters, we call them, which there were some things we were doing to filter out whether or not PIC was eligible for a call. Some of those things had to do with whether it was a first party caller or a third party caller. We removed that filter so that first party and third party callers could call for the PIC team. And that began on June 17th. And that's important because that was one of the barriers to the data. So just a refresher on the goals that we set at the beginning of the pilot. One of the things that we did based on the data we had from 2019, because we began developing this pilot in 2020, we used 2019 data. It was estimated that 43% of the mental health calls that came in would be able to be PIC alone. That 43% would qualify based on historical data. That's our goal. So again, the progression of this data, on May 31st, we were at 6%. We removed those call filters, and we have been able to advance to 20% based on data that I'm going to show you from the computer aided dispatch program from June 17th when we did that until the end of November. So showing this data, what's here on this slide are all the 25 card or mental health events that were recorded by the system during this time frame of June 18th through November 29th. And as you can see, the whole picture here are all of those card type events, where you can see that PIC team does go on all of them because we do a co-response. But the blue represents what the PIC team has been doing alone. And we did take a hand tallied sample of the team's experience over this past week to see if that matched up with what this data is showing, and it does. We're at about 20% of the calls where PIC is able to respond alone, and there are the remaining calls that we're not. The yellow that's here is what's important. I want to point out. The yellow here is where the ambulance is requested by the caller. And so when an ambulance, at this time, when an ambulance is requested by the caller, the ambulance goes to the scene, is sent. And when an ambulance is sent, the police are sent. And that changes from a PIC alone call to a complete co-response with all three, responding with AMR, with the police and PIC responding at the same time. But those 25% could be PIC alone call types if the ambulance had not been requested. And we don't know whether they're required or not. That's a different question. But had they been not requested, they would not have triggered the co-response. So that's something that we can talk about. But I did want to show some additional data to show that there's another category that I want to make sure everybody understands is also happening with the PIC team. This gray slice of the pie that's added here is the amount of calls that PIC has been going on that they've been requested by RPD. And these would be calls that don't fit in the 25 card event type at the time that they come in to 911. But when the officers go to the scene, they make an assessment and they have requested PIC this amount of times during this period, which is a significant amount. So on average, PIC has been going on upwards to 160 calls per week. And at this point, the team is only responding to mental health. We have not expanded beyond the call types except for when requested by RPD. So where we are able to do more, we are certainly handling a high level of capacity of calls. But that's where that barrier is regarding the ambulance response for PIC alone calls. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and turn it over to my colleague, Director Soretto, if you would like to add anything to the conversation about the data and where we are with the barriers to reaching that 43% target that we had set out in the pilot.
Good afternoon, everyone. Just to start with the data, the initial data that we were trying to get for Dr. Lemon-Torres in the initial implementation of the program, because of the way we had to tweak the system to override certain things to get the response that we were looking for, the data is not the most accurate. The most accurate data we have is from June 18th until November 30th. That is our present dispatch in configuration. And that's how we're getting, that's why we feel that's the most accurate data. We do have plans to tweak that by the end of the year so that it'll be easier to pull the data out of the system. You got to remember, this is a new system that, we're just understanding the inner workings of it and how to properly get the data that we're looking for out of it. I would like to add that we work closely with Dr. Lemon-Torres regarding this program. We're all on board with the goal of the program and how it's going to work and how we want it to work. And I think it's a work in progress. As you can see, we've made steady progress along the way. And I'll be glad to take any other questions that might come in.
Is there anyone else from the administration side that's going to speak before we open it up to questions?
I don't believe so.
I got a question. Okay, so I'm not going to act like, I've been following this process closely. I have not, but I just have some general questions. So 121, PIC began alone with 2 call types. So what does that mean when you say it began alone with 2 call types?
What that means is that there were, we looked at all of the types of mental health calls that come in. Some of those calls, they're all categorized based on the level of severity of the call. And so 3 call types were designated to be, the most safe for the individual in crisis to have the PIC team as its responder. We began on the 21st with 2 of those 3 call types because there was a technical issue with enacting the 3rd type. And we were able to address that when the new CAD started on March 14th.
Okay, so 121, 2 call types. Now the next bullet on that slide says co-response began 3/14. So did you add another call type or did you just add co-response to the 2 existing call types?
We just added co-response to the 2 existing code types.
Okay, but initially it was deemed that the 2 initial call types were of, for lack of a better way of putting it, non-severe quality such that PIC team could respond to them on their own, right?
That's correct.
So why was co-response added in 314 if you had already designated that these call types didn't need co-response?
Well, the two call types that we were going alone were going to stay, they were going to stay alone when we added the co-response. The co-response was at really the request for us from administration and the community for us to increase the availability of the PIC team, but also the PIC team on the scene to be dispatched. There were some events that, you know, prompted us to expedite having the co-response happen in March. It was always planned in the pilot, but not necessarily, you know, less than 2 months into the pilot. So we did add co-response, but we still kept the two code types that we were going to alone.
Okay, I guess I'm confused.
Okay.
And obviously, please, if you got an answer, go ahead.
Yep, I got an answer, sir. So the co-response was added for every mental health call that came in, not just those 3 codes. So it was for every single one. PIC would be dispatched with the Rochester Police Department. That was added in March.
Okay, but you had already designated that you had some call types that didn't require it. So it sounds like what you did in March is that you said, no, there are no call types that are non-PIC. We're going to send the police to everything. No,
that's not accurate. I'm sorry.
Okay.
The 3 individual code types that were PIC alone stayed that way. We just, in March, we added a co-response on every other one.
Okay. So does that mean, how many additional call types were added in addition to the other 2?
All of them.
Okay, but how many is all of them? I don't know what that means.
Is that 25? Is that number for how many call types there are on the 25 card?
No, that's just the number of the card. There are more than 24 codes.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I'm good.
Yeah, I have a question. So anecdotally, and I don't have any data to back this, but just from what I've heard from people in the community and also some folks who are in law enforcement as well as on the FIT side of things, there seems to be some question about when PIC is involved, when it's not, when is FIT involved. Sometimes it seems like FIT is arriving on the scene for PIC calls. And I just wanted to understand what that process is and what that collaboration is. Is that generated by 911? Is that generated somewhere else? And how do we mitigate that kind of problem?
Well, we did have some of those issues very early on in the pilot, but those have been resolved because there is a process in place. So when all PIC is to respond to all calls in the city. If PIC is unavailable, then FIT is called out. So that's worked out between PIC, FIT, and RPD. That's in you know, in the orders, in the protocol. But we begin working very closely with FIT, training with FIT, talking with FIT, and meeting with FIT on a regular basis so that we didn't have that issue. But initially we did, and we worked that out. So the process is PIC is called out. If PIC is not available, FIT will go. But just remember that FIT does not go from dispatch. FIT can only be requested by law enforcement when on the scene. So if law enforcement is on the scene and they need PIC, but PIC's not available, then PIC informs the dispatcher to let RPD know that they can request FIT.
Okay, in that regard, there seems to be something happening because I had some situations that were brought up from the community that, they requested or PIC was supposed to be on the scene and then they told them to leave. And again, this isn't necessarily something we can mitigate in this meeting, but I think we should look into this a little bit closer. I feel like there's something going on where PIC is being asked to leave scenes.
I'd like to say that was an experience that I watched happen on the ride along, is that PIC was canceled. We were a block away and we're told, by the police, I believe on the scene, or maybe it was the dispatcher, that they were no longer needed. And it was my understanding that PIC couldn't be canceled. So I'd like clarity there too.
So while that has been happening, and that has been continuing to come across dispatch, our protocol on the PIC side is that only a PIC supervisor can cancel PIC. Law enforcement can say, we're done at the scene, we don't necessarily need them, or something happened and this call doesn't require it, and is in some cases trying to save PIC a trip. But if that's not the case, I mean, that's for PIC to kind of work through with dispatch as to where the call is, the state of the call. But our process is that, only PIC supervision can cancel PIC from a call. That has been an ongoing issue.
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions as well.
Mary, before you go on with those questions, can I just, so knowing that I've heard the same calls that I think Councilmember Lupi and Councilmember Melendez just described. Commissioner Lamontora has acknowledged that it's an ongoing problem. Can we just kind of close the loop on what the process is to begin to address that problem? Is that something that's just happening, within the scene itself, that it's more about a training thing that needs to happen, or are there other mechanisms that we can use to help to address this? Because I've gotten a number of calls about this too. Mary, I think you and I were looped into an email together about something that happened up in the Northeast, where the same type of thing happened. It was really concerning to the folks who were there, who desperately wanted PIC, but PIC was told not to stay on the scene. What are we functionally going to do to address that?
Aaliyah, would you like to talk about what you've been working on with RPD to address this?
Yes, good afternoon. I have been working with RPD on a regular basis. Commander Lefebvre and I just met last week. We continue to try to assess and reassess the protocols that are being used. I know that RPD has sent out communication to officers regarding the fact that they are not to cancel PIC for any reason. And our team definitely follows an all-call response model. However, there are times when we may arrive at a scene and there may be something unfolding at the scene that does not require us to provide service. That is a call that we would no longer be involved with because we're not needed and the police are doing whatever they need to do on their end. I believe we are seeing less cancellations, but we are still seeing cancellations and hoping that the work we're doing with RPD around addressing these issues will help the number to continue to decrease. And Commander Lefebvre can talk about what they're doing on RPD's end.
That'd be great.
Sure. Good late afternoon, early evening, everyone. Yes, we did meet this week, and for whatever reason, there's some sort of communication error between PIC, RPD, and I don't think it's any fault of anyone. I think just like any new venture, there's going to be ups, downs, bumps in the road, until we get to some sort of normal process. And one of the things that we talked about is getting out information such as PIC has a 24/7 cell phone when they're on duty. So what we've done is we've pushed out correspondence to our officers, say, hey, look, you're not sure, give them a call. if there's some sort of area where for some reason PIC may or may not be needed and you're trying to do a good deed by not wasting their time, call them, let them make the call. So that's just stuff that we've done in the very short term. As far as, I don't know, Aaliyah was like Monday, maybe, I think we started working on this. Maybe it was a little sooner, but so we pushed all that out through R&E this week, and we're going to continue to monitor and track it. So, it's a good new resource that's out there. And, just like anything else, we're just trying to figure out how to properly be a good partner in this and obviously help the situation and not hinder it.
And I would just like to add that, we did have these conversations and work through some protocols, but there have been leadership changes, and that some of the start-stop on this is due to that, because we've worked through orders and protocols, but people have been reassigned or otherwise.
And that is factual, because I initially was working with Mark Simmons from RPD. We were meeting on a monthly basis as we worked through some things, and he has now gone to another position. So I've started now the relationship with Commander LaFave and Lieutenant Hayes around, again, continuously and consistently making those assessments and adjustments as needed.
Got it. So it really is. I mean, there's a lot about continuity, which is something I've spoken with Commander LaFave in the past about the same type of thing at the neighborhood service centers and the CPOs and the neighborhood and business association meetings. That the continuity with those things is absolutely key. So maybe that's a role that we as council can play is just assuring that there's some continuity from the RPD staff who's involved. I'm not sure.
In terms
So
of, oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, if I could also add that if we can learn about these situations in a real time or as close to the time of the event, we could look into each situation. And if there is a certain problem or a certain area of the city or certain officers aren't following the procedures, we'd be happy to look into it and find those corrections. It helps a lot if we can get it within a day or two of the situation happening, because it's difficult to assess what happened a month ago. We'd rather look at things and investigate them ourselves in real time and find out what did happen, and then we can work with ECD and the PIC team and get this worked out.
What a good protocol for that.
We'll certainly do that. But the magnitude of this, it has certainly come down, but we're still managing the attempts at upwards of 50 cancellations a week. So those are the attempt. The numbers are coming down. If we can get them down to a more reasonable way to do that, to call you up and say this just happened. Right now, it's just so pervasive that we really need to continue what Commander LaFave and Aaliyah have started to do to get that number down.
And can I just say one more thing, Doctor, to that point too, is we have a police department have over the last few months, we've tried to become super efficient and maximize our manpower. And I think what we're doing is we think sometimes we're doing a good thing by trying to maybe help out our partners as well, because there's obviously an increased volume in mental health calls. So it's like, I think sometimes even when we're trying to be a good neighbor and juggle that, maybe we're doing more harm than good. So I think I agree with the DCA. Real-time stuff will help. And we'll continue to push the message down. I think we have to basically reprogram some of our cops to understand it's okay to just let it happen. You don't have to, make sure, you don't have to cancel everything. You can let other people do their job. So I think it'll be okay. I think if we keep, on top of this, I think we'll get the result that we're looking for.
Do you all have regular meetings among each other?
We do. Aaliyah, would you like to? We do. Aaliyah, would you like to chime in?
Between PIC and RPD?
Yeah.
Yes, I was meeting with Lieutenant Simmons on a monthly basis for the past probably about 5 or 6 months. Sometimes we met bi-weekly if certain issues came up. And now we'll continue the monthly meetings or an as needed with Commander LaFave, as I've been instructed that he's going to be my contact now.
So those are the meetings where you go over the, whether it's the cancellation or cancellations or changes or any kind of odd or unanticipated difference in what you thought should be the practice.
Yes, that will be one of the things that is discussed. However, if we do have anything that is of urgent concern, we most certainly will communicate in between those meetings.
Thank you.
I was just going to ask if council members get notified of incidents, would it be good chain of command be to bring them to Aaliyah?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And I guess I had heard this, but I don't exactly know which channel it came through, that some of the cancellations were, if RPD arrived on scene and decided it was an MHA, that would proceed and the person would be taken to the hospital rather than have PIC come on scene. So is there any clarity around that?
That's still an issue. The issue around the determination of an MHA is something that we have to continue to work through. We had developed a protocol with AMR where we have an algorithm of when it makes sense for AMR to move forward with transport, if PIC and AMR are on the scene together, or if it would be something that, PIC would take over, chain of custody, so to speak, of the individual in crisis. So we have that worked out with AMR. We have not finished working through that process with RPD. We did work really hard to have that conversation, and we did not yet resolve that issue. Our goal, the goal of the pilot, is to reduce hospitalizations and to reduce, that transport whenever possible and offer alternative responses. It's hard for us to do that if we're not at the scene to make the assessment and to make the alternative, or to agree that there is in fact an MHA that's necessary. Because the people who can make that, assessment versus have the authority to do that, those are two different things. And so with having the PIC team as a resource, they should be brought to the scene whenever possible to make that assessment when that's a clear opportunity, as opposed to being canceled. So we do still need to work on that because that is still an issue.
Do you feel that some of that barrier is around fear of liability versus chain of custody, and maybe that plays into some of the 911 dispatch as well?
Oh, I don't know about the 911, but I do believe that the conversation has been around liability and has been around, how to deal with that. And, we have guidance on how to deal with that. We just have to, we have to work on coming up with a protocol that fits for, everyone. And we're working with a new team of people now. And so we have to re-engage that portion of the conversation around where we were with the development of this algorithm, because ultimately PIC is there to be a resource for RPD to be able to be freed up to do other work. And if we can take that off of their plate, that's the right resource to do that. So it is something we still have to address, and it really should be addressed through looking at the protocols and developing a similar algorithm to what we have done with AMR, so that we can make the safest and right choices. There are ways to do it.
It sounds like maybe something that we'll have to come back to in a couple of weeks or months to check in on, but it sounds like, you know, you have some solutions in the pipeline to continue to work through. I brought up 911, maybe not chain of custody was the right way to address that, but and maybe Director Soretto, you have some insight here. Is there some fear around, especially the concept of violence, right? The PIC calls where they are dispatched alone, don't have any, you know, threat of violence, but violence can be subjective, like aggression versus is that violent? And is there maybe some fear on the dispatcher's side that making the wrong call and sending PIC alone when really it should have been the police, that, you know, they could be liable, or just fear in general of making the wrong call?
Well, I think that, you know, you have to remember, right? This is a system that was set up for emergency response. It was set up to dispatch the police, to dispatch fire, and to dispatch EMS, right? So our dispatchers, they have questions they ask as part of the process. And when they ask the questions, they put the answers that they're given, right? So they're always gonna lean towards cautious. They're always gonna lean towards caution. That's how they're trained. And that's how I want them to lean towards, because we have most of the calls are not these mental health calls, right? So it's a double-edged sword, you know, but I don't think that they worry about liability. I think they just answer as the questions are answered, and it all depends on whoever's calling and what they're saying when they answer the question, right? The first question on the card is he or she violent? It's the first question. So however they answer that depends a lot on what happens the rest of the way down. And like you said, everybody's interpretation of what's violent is different. I mean, me and Danielle have talked about this, you know, over and over again. And I don't have control over that card set. That's a national standard. So that's what I would say on that. I don't know if I answered your question or not, but
Yeah,
I don't think
I'm-
they fear liability. I just think they want to do the
Okay.
right thing. And I
Yeah.
don't think they worry about if it's police or PIC that's going. I think they want to just make the right determination on the call. And I think anybody that's responded to a call can understand that, hey, a lot of times how it's put out is not what you find when you get there, you know?
Well, yeah, and I could understand, you know, the background, you know, the options that they've had before were police, fire, and EMS, and that the PIC team is new. And so erring on the side of caution might be kind of what had been done. I know I'm interested in you know, some of the other cities that have this model. You say it's a national standard. If those are the triage questions that they go through,
Yeah.
because I know some of them have a mental health clinician embedded within the 911 department to more to better be able to make
Well,
the call.
I think there's room for improvement. I definitely think that. I don't know if it's necessarily the right place to place the people is in our shop, kind of like the way the nurse navigator thing is going to be rolling out down the road for medical calls, where we triage the call to the best of our ability, and then certain codes are rolled out to a nurse navigator who does further interviews of the person that's calling. And if they determine there's an ambulance needed or a different response, they send it back or they handle it themselves. I think that's something that should be explored. I've discussed that with Dr. Torres. And so, yeah, we're not against that. I just think that having them embedded here, we don't really have the resources or the space for here, but I'm not against exploring that at all. I definitely think there's room for improvement on that. I mean, if you look at the graph that we put together from June 17th, and you really look at the numbers, we're hitting at 43%. We're at 45, but you go from 25% of those calls, right? Their ambulance is going because the people are asking for an ambulance. And I think that's another room where we have room for to explore with Dr. Cushman and whether we can override that request and push it a certain way. We're just not there yet.
I'm curious about that. Is it really, not to question it, but you know, is it the people say I need an ambulance, or is it determined through the line of questioning? Is it an offer do you need an ambulance?
Well, it's through the questions, but a lot of times people call up and just say, we need an ambulance.
Okay.
I'd have to listen to the individual calls to let you know exactly how they go, and the volumes, a lot of calls. But I do think there's room for improvement on that. And I think, Doctor, don't you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Because the issue isn't the ambulance. The issue is that in some cases it is, because we know we've had an ambulance shortage and a shortage of availability. And if we are sending ambulances when it hasn't really been assessed that that there's an actual need, it's just, we haven't gotten through the questions. We just start with, an ambulance and we send one. That's not only tying up an ambulance, but it's also bringing RPD, because the ambulance won't go without RPD. And what that does is now you have all three resources going when it really could just be PIC going. If PIC goes and determines that an ambulance is required, they can call an ambulance right from the scene. They can also call the police right from the scene. They have emergency buttons and radios. So they're not going back through the chain. They're not going back through to call as if you were calling 911 from the outside. So there is a mechanism for PIC to do that. We really do have to look at how this connection between the request, the ambulance, and the police is utilizing resources, because I think we can identify that we now have the police going to 25% of PIC alone calls that they don't need to go to just because the ambulance is going. That's what's happening.
Is that an AMR protocol, or is that a emergency communications protocol to send the police when an ambulance goes out?
I'll let Mike answer that. I don't know the answer to that.
Routinely, that's how they're handled. Yes.
But
It's from here. It's
that's an ECD protocol.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I have a follow-up question along the lines of, calling 911. I know that also there's the 211 option that people can call and request PIC directly. And as we get further down this rabbit hole of trying to change the response to some of these calls, and I know when I ask this question, it means more resources allocated to this, but do you see any benefit of having a very specific and specialized mental health line at some point, whether that's at the 911 center or someplace else? I know we have 311 for city-related calls and city-related issues. I just wonder if there's any value in that type of thing, because I think there's so many different ways that these calls can come in, and it just feels like if we were to educate the community and create a process where people can call directly just for mental health services, that some of these challenges might be mitigated. Because you can call 211 for so many different things, right? You can call for a meal for a senior, you can call for a service somewhere else in the community. And I just don't know that it's as specialized or concentrated of an effort as we may need.
Yeah, I think 211, certainly exists for that. There is also 988 that is, being rolled out. And 988 is also going to end up being administered by 211. So I think that there are going to be mechanisms to tell people, if you have having a mental health issue specifically, call 988. It is going to end up going to 211. And they're going to triage it that way, as opposed to, press 1 for food, press 2 for, crisis.
That's helpful.
Yeah. So, and then once they do get to that line, we've been working with them to say, press 1 for the PIC team. And then they can press 1. That's been a work in progress too. In terms of, really refining that, because there is such a menu of things that they do, and making sure that our access is there. The hardest part is retraining the community though, because most people just call 911. That's where and so we continue to grow the number of people who are utilizing 211 to reach PIC. but it's still gonna be the majority of people coming through 911 at this point.
988 is what? I got you. 98 is what now? Where is it? And who's administering that?
It's actually being rolled out. It's actually being rolled out across the country as a mental health suicide specific emergency number. And that is something that, you know, it's coming. And we've been having meetings about that. I know Aaliyah's been attending those about what that's going to mean and how that's going to roll out with 211. But it's going to be something that they're going to have to work hard with the community to retrain them on that.
Yeah.
I'm imagining there's going to be a large community education campaign on that.
Councilman Patterson?
Okay, so this has been incredibly informative. I guess the challenge is, and I don't know how far afield this question takes us, but what percentage of these calls are frequent, for lack of a better way of putting it, frequent flyers? Folks who have ongoing, consistent mental health issues that are not getting a systemic support. I mean, ideally, the PIC team is the equivalent of the emergency department. Well, you shouldn't get your general health care in an emergency department. You shouldn't be getting your mental health care through the PIC team. So what percentage of this call volume falls there?
Aaliyah, would you like to answer that?
Councilman Patterson, I would say that there are definitely frequent callers, repeat callers as they're termed, and right now, percentage-wise, I'm not sure, but I would say that we probably have about 10 to 12 of those callers. However, the Crisis Services Unit has developed a process to try to work with those callers. So they are now being referred to either our peers and or our counselors on the community support team, so that we can try to address some of those deeper rooted issues, and in doing so, prevent some of those same callers from calling us around the same issues, as well as a long-term help to RPD so that they're not constantly being called by those same folks either.
Great. And so, you know, Councilmember Lupien, I just have to commend you for bringing this issue to light, but it sounds like everybody's working together, moving in a good direction, starting to hit some of those benchmarks. Councilmember Lupien, does that sound about right to you, or?
I think that there's still some issues that are needing to be resolved. And for example, with the ECD protocol requiring an ambulance to go out, or the police to go out with an ambulance, you know, can we, for the 3 calls that PIC is alone, can we not send the police with the ambulance?
That sounds like a great question.
Dr.
So
Soto?
Who would determine that?
Deathly silence.
The
will work-
AMR likes to have the police with the ambulance. It's not just the communications department. AMR does like to have the police with the ambulance when they go on calls.
That, I don't think that's, no, let me rephrase it. Is that a provision of their contract to serve? Because it seems to me that's an added level of expense for their comfort.
Especially when the calls are determined to be nonviolent ahead of time.
Yeah, I can review the contract. I can and check with the fire chief on that contract to see if that is a stipulation.
Yeah, because it really does. I think the key point of your statement is like, and I think our question is required.
Right.
If it ain't required, and you're, you know, in this time of tight resources, it ain't even about the money, it's about the manpower. We ain't got the people. It's like one less call an officer gets to go to is one more call they can go to somewhere else. And we surely need them somewhere else.
And additionally, I'm very interested in learning more about the idea of a third party being handed off to do the triage with maybe not a mental health clinician embedded within 911. I hear, that there's maybe not the space, but having, someone who has more of a clinician background being able to make the call, especially around, what kind of a response that gets dispatched. So I think that's a positive, next step that could help alleviate some of the burden on both the police and ambulance. Go ahead.
Director Serrato, what is the status of the nurse navigator?
Yeah, that was my question. Yeah.
Isn't that what that is for?
Well, the nurse navigator is going to be set up for medical, not mental health. And that's going to be going into effect in January, first part of January, 2020.
I hear you. It'll go into effect in January, is that what you said?
January, yes, I'm sorry, ma'am.
And it's only for physical health as opposed to, but when you're getting to that whole question, you go through some other stuff. So what does the navigator find out?
Well, the nurse navigator is set up basically so if to try to get the individual that needs the treatment they need the fastest way, right? So if somebody has a broken arm, their son breaks their arm on a swing set, and they don't have transportation, they would call for an ambulance. So part of the nurse navigator is to provide a different way for that individual to get their son to say a critical care facility or not a hospital where they can get the treatment they need and get a ride there, get the treatment faster and be home quicker. That's part of that nurse navigator thing.
I think that sounds like a wonderful description of what we also need for mental health.
Yeah, I wonder if it's possible. I'm not sure who's providing the service, but if mental health could be an add-on, if we've already got the structure set up.
That
And maybe
it would be helpful. It would be helpful. I mean, I think when I was speaking with Director Serrato about this, there is, there's some county, collaboration that has to happen here, because this is a county-wide system, and that there's some decisions that have to be made through the county and through the county medical director that I think we need to make sure is a part of the conversation. Is that right, Director Serrato?
Yes, we usually use Dr. Cushman. He helps us navigate this sort of thing and helps us with how we dispatch. You have to remember, this is a county dispatch facility. We dispatch everywhere. We answer phone calls from everywhere. So any situations where we can have less changes, so it's more the same, we'll have less errors and we'll dispatch the right resources properly. So any way we can collaborate so we're all on the same page makes it a lot easier.
So
the county needs a big team.
Elevate that conversation to bring that.
I'm not saying that we can't do it. I'm just saying
exactly.
it makes it easier to do it that way.
So
Maybe
think,
I'm not asking the question right. Give it a shot, Mike.
So I think, and I feel, so I'll just talk about me, that it sounds as though we need a nurse practitioner for mental health to provide this service on a county-wide level. Now, of course, we're the Rochester City Council, so, like we can make decisions for the county. No, we can't. But I would love to continue this conversation and explore this conversation with the county from the perspective of actually mental health is their primary responsibility. And so because it is their primary responsibility, it's in their interest and our interest that this position be added to their budget to provide this service and increase the response time and the quality of life across the county. That's just my feeling What
There's
do other?
gonna there's gonna need to be some top-down support from this at the county, because the one of the reasons why we're here is because the county's motto of responding to mental health is the FIT team, which is to be is not to be dispatched, is not to be a first responder. And you know, all conversations to this point have led to that not being willing, they're not willing to change that model. And so this is why we have two different models going on in a 911 center that serves the whole county. And so if we have the triage happening, that could still happen even with having separate first responder models, but there has to be some, you know, some buy-in from, you know, this has to be something that comes from the top in order to have this move forward, because we have you know, exhausted our opportunities you know, within this level of conversation.
Dr. Lyman Torres, why are they committed to the other model? Your opinion, your perspective. Why is that the case?
Well, they have a number of you know, they have a number of law enforcement agencies that have to be on board, right? Not just one law enforcement agency that has to be on board. And we've been fortunate, you know, our partnership with the police chief and RPD on this, everybody's been on board with making this happen. But that's not necessarily the case across all the towns and otherwise. And so all of those police chiefs would have to support a different model because it did require us to get sign off from our police chief in order for this to move forward. So, and I'm not sure where that rule comes from, but that was what you know, that's how we've been operating. So I think that that's been kind of a barrier for, you know, the county making a county-wide move to a first responder situation.
Yeah, I would echo that, being in all those meetings. That's the impression I walked away with. And I believe that there was a plan put before all of the police chiefs in the county, and they declined.
In your opinion, Dr. Lyman Torres, should we be considering a devolution of authority around mental health back to the city in order to get the quality of services that we want?
Not unless that comes with the funding.
The money.
Well, yeah. Always want the money, right?
Not unless it comes with the money. And right now, the funding and the mandate, the funded mandate is at the county level. And you know, I think that, you know, I think that was done with good reason. And you know, at this point, I think that the impetus is on getting the leadership of the city and the county on the same page.
Thank you, ma'am.
I have just one more question around the data. I know, you know, from the advisory team meetings, the data that we had was maybe from June of this year. And, you know, we have some updated data now. Is it easy for you guys to pull that data to kind of see real time some of the statistics about how calls are going out? Is that through the CAD system?
Yeah, Councilmember, we have worked very hard the last few weeks to try to manipulate the system to pull the data out that we need, and we think that we've came up with a process, and we're going to work through that so we can have that data available to the teams that need it. We might have to do some code changes in the background of this computer system. We have a system right now. I assigned one of my people to work on that. It's in the test environment right now to see if it'll work, and we have to look and see if the procedures will work. We're hoping to have some changes into effect maybe January 1, but we have to make sure they work in the system. We have a test system for the new CAD, so we run it through there. But we are working closely with Dr. Lyman Torres, and I think we now understand exactly what information they're trying to gather, and we think we can provide it. So That's
Now,
where
is
we're at
that,
right now.
thank you. Is that provided to them, or are they able to access the data themselves?
Well, that's the sticking point, right? Is that we think if we change the coding that they'll be able to exit themselves. But either way, we're going to be able to get it to them. So the information they need. We figured it out, I think. It took a while. Apologize for that. I know we put the doctor in a little bad spot. It's, I'll take the heat for that. It was just trying to figure this new system out. The county IT department was also trying to figure it out, how to get it out the best way. It wasn't like we were trying to keep anything from anybody. It was just hard to get it out. And the system's set up so that our user agencies can get the information themselves, so we don't have to do it for them. It just wasn't working because of some kind of connection between the county IT and city IT. And I think that's where the fault was. So I've got my team putting it together. So hopefully we can send it to the doctor so she can get monthly information.
That sounds great. And I know we're over time. I did think of one more issue around repeat callers. I know in my neighborhood, there's a repeat caller that is suffering for some reason with paranoia and calls the police at least once a week on her neighbor. And it's very clearly a mental health issue, but what she's calling about isn't apparent. Is there a way that we can track, where the calls are coming from so that it can flag it in the system to be like, okay, this isn't going to require a police response. We know what's going on here to send the PIC team, because I'm not aware that a mental health response has been deployed for this situation.
I think that, again, we are kind of restricted to what we get on the phone. Even though we could assume that, hey, this is going to be the same old, we don't know that. So we have to dispatch how the call comes through, how the questions are answered and what they're saying on the call.
Dr. Lemon-Torres, do you see any role in that situation for a co-response, or is that you really just have to, even though it's the 50th time and the police already know her and know the situation, that it has to be police and that PIC won't be called?
I think there's a few things. I think that if our system was able to do it, I think it could, a flag for a co-response would be helpful. I think that, once RPD's on the scene, if they've been there 12 times and they know that the individual has mental health issues, they could request PIC and request PIC to come to the scene. That would be another way to solve the issue. And then a third option is to let people know that, the PIC team will go out for third party calls. So if there is someone else who believes that their neighbor who is doing the calling but has the mental health issue needs to be checked on by the PIC team, they can make that call to have the PIC team go out and attempt to make contact. So there's a few different ways that scenario could happen, but we really do need to know about these familiar faces so that we can use the 4 full-time peers that we've been able to add to the team, funded with our grant from FLIP, that we now have 4 full-time people with lived experience who can also follow up and support familiar faces with, hopefully getting into more permanent care.
That sounds really positive. And Commander Lefebvre, is that is it EDC Dwyer? Did I get that right? Oh, well, my question to you both is that a training, is that how officers are trained currently, or could it be that, for calls like that are repeated, that PIC be involved?
I don't think she knows you're talking to her.
I heard everything that you said, Councilwoman. I guess I just don't understand your question. If you could just maybe clarify it, I could probably give you a better answer.
So 4 calls I think that, this person is not alone probably in suffering from paranoia. Calls that come in of like, my neighbor's doing this, or, whatever it is, that are repeated, that, that are these people known? I'm not sure how staffing is, if staffing is consistent. And if they are, deemed to be, okay, they've been calling about the same thing, we've talked to the neighbor upstairs, or, the person across the street, and we know that this isn't a real issue, can that be a flag in their training to get PIC involved?
I think anytime that we can get a resource that's more specialized in the problem that we are dealing with is always something that we're going to look to try to do. The issues that we run into sometimes is that if it's a call that's determined that we have to respond to, even if it's been the mundane thing that's happened over and over and over again, what happens on the 50th time if that we were dispatched and we don't show up and something adverse happens because of that? That becomes, kind of problematic. Now, does it mean that we can't get there and do a quick assessment and say, oh, we're good, this is so-and-so doing, whatever, let's make sure we could even call PIC and have them on standby and go, all right, guys, you're all clear, and then just separate from the situation.
Yeah.
I definitely think there's a lot of room for improvement, but at the same time, I think ongoing communication between ourselves and the PIC team from an administrative standpoint is going to help. And I think it's something that we're going to need to continue to do as we move forward. I hope that answers what you're saying.
We're like completely out of
Yeah,
time.
thank you.
I think there's another level to that, but we actually are not able to delve into it today. But we will continue to work on this. Once again, I want to thank you all for joining us this afternoon and being willing to try and address these sort of thorny issues. If we keep in mind that we are developing a system, it hasn't been done before like this. So we'll have some bumps in the road, but as long as we're willing to sit down and figure out what they are and how to address them, we'll be all right. So once again, I want to thank you all for your time. Any additional questions or concerns, you can send them in a text or note, and we can put that in another get together to talk about. Okay?
Thank you.
All right. Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Have a great evening.